Learn the do's and don'ts of successful farm transitioning with a fresh, real-world example. Matt Bowes with AgriGrowth Consulting, and with me today I have Walt Bones. And Walt Bones sits on a board with me, and I thought he would be a great person to bring in here to talk about successful farm transitioning. So, yeah, Walt, do you mind giving us a little background of yourself?
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity here. My great-grandfather homesteaded out in the Parker area, south and west of Sioux Falls, probably 15, 20 miles back in 1879.
Yeah.
I am the fourth generation. I farm with two brothers, a brother-in-law, and we now have three nephews that'll be our fifth generation. Diversified, corn, soybeans, beef cattle, part owners of a dairy, commercial feedlot, seed business. Yeah, a little bit of everything. It builds on the diversity of the group that we have out there and try to utilize all the different skill sets that we have.
So you were the fourth generation.
Yes.
Fifth generation
Yes.
has actively transitioned.
Yes.
And we see this very similar in a lot of businesses I work with, in that they're fourth, fifth, sixth generation even now, and diversified into not just one thing like production, row crop agriculture, but also some auxiliary businesses tied into it. So very standard here. So yeah, and Walt and I, we've talked quite a bit. We sit on a board together and talk agriculture. And I thought that it would be just a great opportunity. I know he's just gone through successfully transitioning out of the farm, or transitioning the farm over. And I just wanted to share some of his perspective on when did he start the process, who helped him, what went wrong, what went right. And we're going to share some of those things right now. Yeah, so tell me about, maybe you're in transition still, or would you say you're fully transitioned out? How are you in that cycle?
It might be good just to set the base a little, to understand kind of the dynamics, maybe
Sure.
our operation out there. My dad started the business called Bones Hereford Ranch Incorporated back around 1950. And as we all grew up, we all were farming under that entity, which was a C corporation.
Okay.
And when we got into the 80s, the tough times of the 80s, which some of us are old enough to remember. I don't know, you probably are too.
I do remember.
I didn't think you're maybe that old, but anyway.
I'll tell a quick story. My dad was a small town ag banker in the 80s. I was in Northwest Missouri at the time. And what I do remember of it is that we used to go farm pond fishing quite a bit. And I do remember that there was this farm pond we used to fish by, Savannah, Missouri, and it was just dynamite. We'd go there, throw some worms out, catch all kinds of fish. And I was 8, 10 years old. And then there came a day where my dad, I was like, can we go fishing there? And he's like, no. He said, we can't go. The farmer won't let us go fishing there anymore. Yep. And the things have happened with lending practices. People are taking over. We're foreclosing on his ground. And so that's what I remember. And then my dad had a bank, that same bank, that had a run on that bank and closed it. That's my background.
Tough times. Tough times. And so you adjust to survive. You've got to do some different things. And so I was one of 7 kids. I was the oldest. And there were 4 of us brothers at that time that were farming. And we had 2 brother-in-laws at the time that were farming. And we thought and so then I had another sister that was not farming. And with the dynamics of the farm program, there's payment limitations, right? Yep. You could only, the corporate farming laws and whatnot, there was only a certain amount of money on your crop insurance and disaster payments and that kind of stuff. There was a cap on what every organization could collect from the federal government. And being a C corporation, we were recognized as one entity. Even though we were the quintessential family farm, we had all these family members, mom, dad, 4 brothers, a couple brother-in-laws. We were still recognized as one entity. And so again, middle of the 80s, times were tough. And so we decided to start an operating entity. My dad was in the legislature. He was wanted to step back a little bit anyway from the active management of the farm, so that the timing was pretty good. My brothers and brother-in-laws and I started a farming operating entity called Hexad Farms, which was a general partnership. There was 6 of us, Hex hexagon.
Yep.
That was the origin of the name. And yeah, you get creative, right?
Yep.
So now instead of having one payment limitation, we had 6. And that organization evolved. One brother got married, another one left to do something else. A brother-in-law left to do something else. Came down to just 4 of us, my 2 brothers, myself, and a brother-in-law. And through those transitions, through the one brother leaving, which was just pretty much right after the start of Hexad Farms, maybe just a year, we didn't have a whole lot of assets or anything built up. There really wasn't much there to haggle over, if that's the right word. There just wasn't anything there yet. But about probably 15 years after that, when my other brother-in-law left, then there was, because we bought the equipment from the corporation, we bought the cows from the corporation, over a period of time, and so we started building the assets there, along with being the operating entity and renting the land that the Bone Surfer Ranch Incorporated owned. So that was our first experience, really, of that transition planning. We learned a few things through that process. In particular, how do you value those assets? And we all knew that during the 80s, the early 80s, things were compound, being worth more and more, and then you get the mid 80s and they crashed and went about half that value. How do you compensate? How do you do some of those things? And so we tried to figure out how to navigate some of those changing values, how to make them reasonable. Of course, there's discounts that are acceptable through IRS. You can't, there's limitations that you can use for lack of marketability. Family-owned, closely held corporation or business is a partnership, and then a minority interest in that business is also. It's just not worth as much as if you were trying to sell a majority interest in the business. Upwards of a 30 to 40% discount was pretty common, and so we used, Jim Wiederick was the attorney that we used out of Woods Fuller here in Sioux Falls. Our accountant at the time was Rodney Lamfers, and then transitioned into Becky Riddle, both with Lamfers and Moss accounting firm here in town. Of course, we kept our farm credit lender, Greg Lund, was integral in that whole thing too, because you had to come up with financing and all those different things. That was our first foray into trying to figure that out, and so we got, as we went along, about every 4 or 5 years, we would look at it, review it, try to figure out what does our buy-sell in the partnership. I'm not talking about the ranch, but in the Bone Surfer ranch, but in the partnership. Because that's what I just transitioned out of here a couple of years ago. What we decided to do, and that's what we did, not saying it's the only way to do it, Matt, but what we did was that we decided to use, Greg Lund, our, again, farm credit loan officer, at the end of the year puts together a balance sheet every year. And they've got guidelines there within the farm credit system that they use to value things.
Sure.
Again, your dad probably did the same thing. At the end of the year, you value things. And back in the 80s, with inflation, things got worth more and more, and then they put almost that true value, then you could lend against, borrow against it. Yeah. It went crazy.
Well, sounds similar.
Exactly. But Greg he wouldn't take that full inflation value.
Sure.
He'd take part of it, but not all of it. And it worked out pretty close to that 25 to 30% discount.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the value on the equipment and the value on their livestock and all that kind of stuff. So we just agreed, and you can do whatever you want, but we just agreed that let's just use Greg's year-end balance sheet for our values. And that's what we came up with. And
so if I'm hearing this right, we think about transition planning almost like an event.
Yep.
Like for you, it was just ongoing multiple events that just kept rolling into one another.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you just said, hey, this year is the year we figure out everything. It was just a rolling plan.
It really was, because my dad, even when we had Bone Surfer Ranch meetings when we were young, he kept saying, my grandfather used to even say, okay, if I die today, here's what's going to happen. Okay. And that attitude of thinking about what if had been ingrained into us, so to speak, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And again, in our buy-sell agreement with Hexad Farms, what if one of us gets injured on the job and gets disabled? And so we addressed that in there. We said, hey, we'll keep paying you full salary, just whatever. So there's a number of different things in that agreement, in our partnership agreement, along with the, get to at age, if you want to retire we had a retirement age of 65, but if you wanted to retire at age 60, well, you would take a percentage, and it's not coming to me. Maybe you take a 25% discount on the value of those assets. If and every year it would ramp up, and you'd get the full retirement benefit at 65.
And did you have to take retirement at 65?
No, because I didn't retire until I got to be age 70.
Okay.
So I waited until age 70.
I didn't know if they were kicking you out.
They might have wanted to at one time. I decided to wait until age 70, then I could max out my Social Security and all that kind of stuff. And so health was fine. I enjoyed what I was doing. And again, one of my considerations was that my two brothers, Steve and Jim, my other three partners, Steve, Jim, and then brother-in-law Lyle, they all had a son that came back to the operation. That was our fifth generation. None of my kids chose to come back. And they had the opportunity, but they chose not to, which is just fine. So there gets to be a point where I just said, guys, it makes no sense for me to continue to amaze or continue to build wealth, build assets here that you're going to have to pay me off someday.
Right.
And it makes no sense for me to have a 1/4 say or veto power in decisions that you want to make for your kids. And so, guys, it's time. And I presented a couple different scenarios. We had the one scenario, basically it was a cash thing over so many years. Hexad had bought some land, and to cut down on the cash requirements, I put together a couple proposals for the guys, worked with our lender and whatnot, and they chose to do the cash thing anyway, which is just fine.
Yeah. But, so how many people did you listed off, how many people do you think helped you along the way through this process?
Yeah, there was the accountant, the farm credit lender, the lawyer, but I think one of the folks that really helped us was a gentleman by the name of Bob Treadway. And Bob bills himself as a futurist, and he came, I ran across Bob during some South Dakota, I was on the South Dakota Corn Board, and he came in to do some planning, put together a strategic planning session. And so that was my first experience, and I ran into him again at a national corn meeting, and we talked, and I asked him if he'd ever done a strategic planning session for just a family farm, and he hadn't, but was intrigued. And long story short, we got it worked out to where he came and stayed with our guys. He was there about 2-3 days early, got to understand the dynamics of our operation, understand the personalities, and through talking with everybody. And then we went into a room in the farm credit office and spent a day. Again, it was the 4 of us Hexad partners, the 3 nephews, and one of our key hired guys. The hired guy wasn't there the whole time, but he was there for a majority of it. And we put on a regular strategic planning session, a roadmap of what we wanted to do for Hexad Farms. What was our path? Toby Keith has got one of the lyrics of one of the songs. If you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else.
Right. It's true.
Yeah, and that was extremely helpful in a number of different ways. Number one, my brother-in-law, he likes to. Number one, didn't think we would be able to afford it, but he leaned over to me halfway through the thing. He said, "This is the best damn thing we've ever done." 2 was, again, we were to the stage in our careers where we weren't going to go all in on something. And we all agreed to that. If there's an opportunity that comes up, if it's a big chunk of land or whatever it might be, we didn't want to take that big bite and sacrifice 30-some years of work and building and everything. So we decided we weren't going to go all in. But I thought one of the most telling things was my nephew, Dan. He got up and in the conversation said, "Your dad took this operation to here, this level. You guys have taken it to here, higher. The expectations are we're supposed to take it even higher yet. And he said, I don't think we're ready yet. And that was again, you assume too many things sometimes when you get that next generation. And what came out of that then was that those three nephews started their own farming partnership. And that first year, we had a quarter section of land that one of our landlords, it was time to renew the contract. And so we just said, hey, why not let these guys have that contract? So they started out with one farm, and they got their loan portfolios and everything all put together. They got all of their farm service agency stuff all put together. And so it was the next year they had 3 farms, and it has just grown from there. It was really a good opportunity for them to just start into the process. They were working around us all the time anyway,
right.
And we're sharing equipment and whatever. But still, it was a real eye-opener, I thought.
Yeah. No, you shared that with me too. You think about what would happen if Dan wouldn't have spoke up at that point.
Yeah.
Maybe he would have felt unconfident the whole way.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk all the time, but there's times we don't communicate very well.
Yeah.
So that's just one of those things that we, again, we're always working together and we're always talking, but sometimes we just don't communicate very well.
Yeah, that's a great perspective on making sure that the next generation is truly ready. And probably to ask that question, and hopefully you get a true answer. And provide those resources around them if they're not truly ready. Great
kids. I just, again, have no reservation at all. Just guys go.
Yeah. So you've gone through this process. We talked about a few things here. What went wrong, or what would you do differently if you did it again? You've done a lot of things right. I know you have. But when you look back and you go, man, I would have done that differently.
Yeah. We changed the Bone Surfing Ranch from a C Corp to an S Corp on the advice of Jim Wiederick, our attorney. And that went smooth. That went okay. Basically, the difference is that the C Corp is just this corporate entity, and you're all shareholders in it. But the S Corp, you are each kind of individual owners of it, and so all of the profits, everything filters down to each individual shareholder more so than the corporation. So you don't get the double taxation, and there's a whole number of different things. And when we did that, again, I had 2 sisters and a brother that were not farming with us at the time, and that created some animosity. I think within the family. I'll take that back. It's not. I think it did. no thinking about it. It did, because we're hammering away every day on the farm, and they're not on the farm. So why should they be telling us what to do every day on the farm? And how do they know what the land rent should be every year? How should they know all these different things?
Yeah.
And shifting that C Corp to the S Corp was probably a good thing, but it created some challenges. And we ended up buying out my 2 sisters and took on a boatload of debt that I probably won't get paid off, but my nephews will get it paid off eventually. But again, that was my 2 brothers and brother-in-law. That next generation, they saw that as a viable business decision that they wanted to make to guarantee the future success of their kids. And that was a challenge. And so we brought in to try to navigate that. Just up the street here a little ways is Aggie Johnson. Aggie owns a business called Wilcate and does a lot of farm business transition planning with farm families. And she talked to each family individually, tried to find some consensus and bring everybody together. And I found the first casualty of emotion is reason at times. My nephews are in the process of buying out my brother John, buying his shares of stock out of a business, which is fine. Yeah, again, so it basically now is just the four families, the Bone Surford Ranch Incorporated, and that's what I view as a legacy asset that I'll pass on to my kids. And yeah, I hope we haven't created another challenge there because my kids aren't involved in the farm.
Right.
They know, they appreciate, they worked out there. My son was out there all the time. But so I've started bringing him in as in board of directors meetings and whatnot. And he gets it. And I think they appreciate that. Yeah, again, hopefully we haven't created a monster there, but I think all in all it's going to work fine.
Yeah. Good. Any other insights you'd like to share? Anything you're just like, man, this would give a ton of value to somebody that's going through the process or thinking about it, or
hardest part, I think, Matt's just getting started, making sure that you got something, and then once you have something, don't think that's the end. I think you just need to keep reviewing it. Tax law changes, all these things change, and there's a lot of assets out there. I know First Dakota Bank has their, Farming First or something. They've got a program that will help families get through that. There's way too much at stake between family relationships, the legacy of all of the work and all of the time and effort, sweat that our ancestors put into getting the operation to where it is today, to let a lack of planning just blow the thing all up. But everybody's got to be on the same page. Everybody's got to buy into what the plan is and see if they want to, that there is a way out if they want to get out, and all of the old adages, what's fair isn't equal and what's equal isn't fair, and we've heard all these things, and they're all true.
Yeah,
they're all true.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, surround yourself with some experts. But yeah, just if you haven't gotten started yet, get started. It's not too late. Plant the tree type thing.
Yeah, I know we're a couple days off Arbor Day, so
yeah, there you go.
It's good. It's good timing. Yeah, I appreciate Walt sharing some insight of successful farm transitioning, and I think everybody can understand some of the emotion that's tied to it. And I think it's when you talk about 5 generations before you, it's somewhat you really need to make time for it. A lot of people worked really hard before us to make sure this didn't fall apart because of lack of communication or planning.
No question. Yeah.
So anyway, thanks again, Walt, for joining me today and sharing those insights. If you have topics that you would like covered on the farm business management space, comment below. Otherwise, thanks a lot, Walt.
Thank you.